Hello, everybody. Welcome to Never Stop, the Artistry of Self-Care and Creativity for Lifelong Embodied Performance, the Feldenkrais Awareness Summit. I am Michael Landau, and I'm your host. We're on the 5th day of the summit, and our theme today is high-performing artists. I have with me two experts, two high performers, two teachers, Feldenkrais practitioners. With me is Robert Sholl, Professor Robert Sholl. He teaches at the Royal Academy of Music and the University of West London. He's an expert on contemporary music. He has written extensively on 20th century music. He has played at some point all of the organ pieces of Messiaen. He's a Feldenkrais practitioner. On the other hand is David Daniel Bowes, a viola, violin, piano player, and an expert in Baroque music. A big focus of his career was Baroque performance practice. He's also a Guild certified Feldenkrais practitioner. He's focused on the skill he was working at the piano as an accompanist, same as me at some point. And well, he says, I want to be the sound of the orchestra. He said that when he was a young boy. There you have it, the sound of the orchestra. Hello, David. Hello, Robert. Welcome. It's lovely to have you here.
Hello, Michael. Thank you very much for having us.
Yes, thank you very much.
So why don't we start? Today's theme is high performance. Let's talk for a moment about what is it that we are actually talking about. What is high performance? What does it mean to you? How do you measure high performance? Does it contrast with low performance? Does low performance exist? What does it mean to you, David? Tricky question.
It's like the hub of the wheel with many spokes. There's many different directions you can go with that. I think that a lot of people, myself included perhaps, I didn't say, oh, I'm a high performing artist. I just was looking forward to being here today and talking. But then I thought, wait a minute, other people regard me as being a high performing artist because I've made many recordings. I've toured around, the world. I've played with different string quartets and chamber music. And you have to attain a certain level of polish and maintain that too, which is for some people difficult because invariably people encounter injuries. Especially if they're playing all the time, 52 weeks a year, like opera or symphony or stuff like that. So you have to find the balance.
Robert, what is high performance for you?
Gosh, it's something that we often recognize, but is a little bit difficult to quantify. So I think it has many elements. It has this element of critical self-awareness and critical self-reflection. It has a kind of continual element of engagement with a process of listening and perfecting oneself. And I think that when one recognizes it in other people, it's also this kind of connection that people have with their instrument. And there's this lovely mixture of ease, embodiment, action, and intention and flow in the work. And I mean, I always come back to something that Esther Talin, who is a developmental psychologist and Feldenkrais person, talked about. She talked about adaptive flexibility. And I think this is a very good model of virtuosity. You know, what we're really talking about in some ways is virtuosity, and this is this ability to be flexible, to move between, to have a number of different options at any particular one point, and actually in that spontaneous moment to be able to choose from those options, and to have that option be calibrated towards the realization of an artistic purpose that may or may not be worked out in advance, because often these things are simply happen at the moment in a concert. They're a response to the light or the heat or the cup of coffee you had beforehand, or the audience, you know, whether the hall's cold or what the instrument feels like at that particular moment. So it's all of those things. But I particularly like this idea of adaptive flexibility, because if we think of something that we're good at, you know, like adding two numbers to equal 4, for instance, you know, we can do that in lots of different ways. You know, we can go, you know, -4 + 8, for instance. Well, we can do it in many different ways, very, very quickly. And this adaptive flexibility is something that is really something that we gain by, you know, being able to do something in, you know, at least 2 ways, possibly 3 ways. And I think Yuri Vada was talking about this the other day. You know, actually doing something in 3 ways is a really good developmental metaphor for students and for everybody, actually, who's thinking about high performance.
Yeah, so before we go on, let me just say a few words to our audience. There are people coming in. Welcome everybody who is live with us here. Let me just tell you that we have a chat, as you probably know, the typical Zoom chat. Make sure that you write to everybody. So if you watch the to whom you are writing, it is by default to hosts and panelists. The chat is for you, the audience, to talk among yourselves. There are some of our speakers here with us. I saw that Alan Fraser is here with us. So welcome, Alan.
Hello,
Alan. So make sure that you write to everybody, and know that we are not going to look at the chat. If you want us to address something, you want to ask something of any of the panel or all of us, make sure you write it in the Q&A. It's a different menu, it's a different little window. So take a look around, you'll see it. The Q&A, we're going to open the discussion to questions at about 40-45 minutes. So if you want us to see it, please go to the Q&A menu. And well, as you know, we have wonderful talks that were released this morning on the topic of the day on high performance. Katie Bull on vigor and vigorous and vibrant. She works with the high performers, and it's a wonderful talk. Gabrielle Lam, a dancer and a choreographer, about sparking the choreographic imagination. Scott Illingworth, a theater person, about actors and embodied tools. Alan Fraser, who is here with us. Everything you do sounds. He's a pianist and piano teacher. There is so much wonderful stuff in this summit. I really can't believe it. I heard most of the talks because I had access to them. If you think that it is worthwhile for you, really think of doing the upgrade. And there is so much material. There is no way you can watch all of it during the summit. So that's a possibility. You can still buy it for a reduced price until the end of the summit. So that's that. So back to you. I want to make a reference to something that Katie Bull said about this definition of high performance. Of course, a performer that goes on stage that has a certain regularity in appearing, has a certain technical dominion of their art. They know what they're doing. They have some, they have passed a long journey of learning and growing in their arts. So this is quite clear that there is some know-how in the technical part of the art and in the way of expressing themselves and showing and communicating with the audience. But Katie said something interesting about the high artist, the high performing artist has a quality of maintaining the beginner's mind and staying with some sense of curiosity. I really like this idea because I think pretty much everybody, doesn't matter if you're an artist or not, we are high performers in some parts of our lives. There are things we want to do well, we try to do well, whether it is being a parent, being at your work, at being athletic or having a garden, doesn't matter. We learn, we want to grow, we want to do things well, but something specific that you can do or choose not to do is maintain this open mind to keep growing. And I think this is a very interesting distinction. Like a high-performing artist is somebody who keeps growing, who doesn't kind of stay on a plateau of good enough and just keeps doing their work. What do you think about that, David?
Yes, that's true. A beginner's mind is like when you're doing a movement in an ATM class and you do a very small movement and then you pause and the next movement is fresh again. And so each movement that you do, whether you choose to keep it small or amplify it, you start fresh each time. And it's really important in the creative mind to not come with a flat line attitude or just do the same things over and over again.
Yeah, Robert.
It's a beautiful way to look at it. I'm glad she said that.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of there's a book by Shinryo Suzuki called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, which is a beautiful book for this kind of thing. And you know, I think Suzuki talks about this idea of having no a priorisms, if one could say that, so that everything is a kind of surprise, even if you know about something very, very well. I remember many years ago. I think it was about 1993, I think it was, seeing Alfred Brendel play some Beethoven sonatas in the Salle Gaveau in Paris. And he played four of my least favorite sonatas, but he played them so wonderfully. They were across the whole gamut of Beethoven's life. And he played them so wonderfully. And it was almost as if he'd been playing them. It was the first time he'd played them. He wasn't sight reading them, obviously. I mean, he'd been playing them for a long, long time. But there was a kind of freshness and spontaneity that I think really derives from a kind of curiosity about the pieces, and also this reaction that one has when one's playing, that no matter how one imagines the sound, that when one actually plays something, at that particular moment when your hand goes down into the keyboard or onto the fretboard or something happens, you hear something that you've never heard before. You've never ever heard before, and it's different. And at that moment, you're both surprised and you're caused to react to that. And if you, it struck me that Brendel was completely alive to that kind of mode, that paradigm of thinking. And I think it's a lovely thing. I mean, I'm someone who does a lot of improvisation. And I really, really notice this kind of thing happening. You know, just play a chord or make a sound, And then there's this question that's created by this sound of what's the next sound? Improvisation, the magic of it is, how do you connect one sound, whatever that sound is, whatever that sound you make at that moment, to that very next sound. And the first sound is a surprise, and the second sound is also a surprise as well.
It is something that happens in the moment, right? This is the magic of performance. It is not some work of art that you worked on, finished it, and then it is out there to look at, like in visual arts. It is something that happens each time, even if you play the same thing again and again, it happens in the moment. So it is in some way a surprise. I like this idea, and it connects very nicely to Feldenkrais. No, in Feldenkrais we are in the moment in a similar way. We don't repeat things just in order to repeat them. It doesn't make any sense if you're not focused and really are in the moment. And David, I saw you wrote it somewhere that Feldenkrais is a musical experience. Some people, also some speakers said it, I don't remember who, in the previous days. So how do you make this connection? How is Feldenkrais a musical experience?
Well, there was at one point in my training, excuse me, that there's always a reference movement when you're working in FI, and you do A, and then maybe you get the questions that your hands are asking take you to B, and you might go back to A just very briefly, and then your hands are curious again, and you're listening to that person who's on the table, and you go to C. So for me, it was kind of a little example of rondo form in piano playing. A, B, A, C, A, D, A, E, maybe back to A at the very end. I mean, that's a very, very simplistic way of looking at it. But I thought, oh, I'll always remember that because, the Beethoven violin concerto last movement is a huge rondo form. And I tried to use that to explain to some of my friends. And I think it didn't come across that well because they weren't as familiar with the Beethoven violin concerto third movement as I was. But I just think it's just, and I heard Michael brought up listening when we first talked together. And I think listening is just one of the most fascinating things. In my training also, after many days, maybe the first 3 weeks or something, I heard a Brahms impromptu on the radio, and I heard it in a completely and utterly different way. There was something more elevated about it. There was something more expanded. There was something more profound. And I've always considered that I was a really engaged, good listener, but there was some level that was brought to it through all the work that I had done for those 3 weeks in FI and with the ATM stuff that we were doing. And so for me, Feldenkrais, because I did a lot of touching for many years, I've touched many, many students, repaired many bow arms, faulty bow arms, and now my touch is even more refined because of the layer that Feldenkrais brings.
Yeah, and Feldenkrais really, used listening as a kind of metaphor for touch, and so actually this idea of touching and feeling and is part of listening, and I think it had some origins in his engagement with submarines and sonar originally, actually, but it's this idea that we are always listening. I actually think about you mentioned the rondo form, David. I actually think about it as a theme and variations, but the thing is, the theme's not just at the start. It's always there. It's in each of those variations, and but each variation also has to be, you have to be in the moment of each variation as well. And so, you get to the last variation, which might be the summative variation, and you can look back on this sort of arc of the journey in an ATM, and you can look back and see how you've the sort of kind of transformation that you've undergone over that thing. And that transformation is premised on a form of self-listening. And I think this is one of the interesting things that happens, both in a performance, but also in practice, because in practice you have to learn to listen better. And I think for me, one of the crucial things is, learning to shut off. Feldenkrais calls it parasitic movement, but learning to not just silence the voices in the sort of the voices of the big other in your mind, which might be saying, oh, so and so plays faster, or so and so is better looking than you are, or all these kind of nonsense sort of super ego injunctions that we carry around in our mind. But actually listening to the quality of our own intention, of our own access, agency, and intention in actually doing something, so that, because actually, even if we knit our brow when we're playing, you see people do that and their neck comes forward. That hugely influences the quality of the listening. And one of the things I've written about, in fact, is that the Weber-Fechner law, should be thought of as a kind of listening law as well. The more we disengage from the effort that's required, and actually the more we can listen clearly to ourselves.
Yeah, I really like this in both in Feldenkrais and in music. And there's something that I just came up with today, and I'll tell you what it is in a second. But before that, I want to testify about myself. I was always very verbal in my thinking. And Feldenkrais said at some point, thinking in words is not thinking, it's cerebration. So it's like noise of the brain. I really felt it in different times in my life that my brain is really noisy with conversation, that it's not really, it's repetitive, it's just noise. And I think this is maybe a good reason why I chose music as a career. And then my second career, Feldenkrais, it is also non-verbal. And even when we were in ATM, in group classes, when the instructions are verbal, it is just a means to construct an idea of movement. So there's also a parallel there, that we speak in languages that are non-verbal. So, and I'm very aware that music is a language. This was in my teaching. It was always that. What is it that you're saying? Say it clearly.
But I think there are linguistic things that we can actually, there are words that we can use to help us get to that state of non-verbal things. So actually language is actual language, English language, or whichever language you want to speak is important. So, if someone comes to you, for instance, and they say, oh, my sound's not very big, as I had a student talking about the other day, what do you do about that? I mean, there are various physical things you can do, but I mean, you might actually say to them, well, can you just make one sound, and then think about differentiations. Think about the different, what would be my red sound, versus my gray sound, or how would I imagine my sound communicating with that person right at the back of the hall who isn't really listening to me? How would I wake them up? What would I do? Because the projection of our sound is both a physical thing, but it's also a psychological thing, and it's also about the way we do think in images and language, not just wordlessly in that sense.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean to say that we should forget about language and never use it again. Not my idea. David, anything to add to this?
I absolutely agree that music is rhetorical. I mean, you can really speak I really feel like we can speak with the bow. And piano was my first instrument. I love playing the piano. I'm completely rusty at the piano, but I sit down and play anyway. I'll decide on a fingering for something really complicated that's Bach. But the rhetoric of music is, I think, what reaches people in the audience, because you're sending out something that speaks to them. And that's what I'm trying to do. And trying to get my teachers to do. I mean, my students to do.
And it's also something that's involuntary as well. So it's something that is coming out of you that you may not really even realize. I mean, and this is why, you often talk to, various elite performers, and they don't actually know what they're doing, because it is something, I think, that's coming out of them that they're not fully aware of. Some people are aware of it, actually. When you talk to people, and they're very conscious of a thing, of various things that they're doing, and that they've kind of worked out strategies to do these things, sometimes in terms of metaphor in their mind about the way they might approach a certain passage or a certain kind of difficulty. But yeah, I mean, it's very much a psychological game as well.
I think when I was a kid, I always was happy to sit down at the piano because I didn't have to figure out how to fix my intonation.
Oh yeah.
And and it's more east-west, you go this way or this way, parallel. And then for the violin, you're going north, south, east, west. The cello, you're going north, south, and a bit slanted, like on a mountain, and the bow is going east, west. And there's a lot of different coordination things that go on with playing those kind of a stringed instrument. It's just that the teacher I like to quote most often, Kato Havash, really impressed me one time by saying, "My dear, you can't really hear exactly how you sound. What you can hear on a string instrument is whether you're in tune or not. You need to be well in tune with your open strings. And you have to constantly be checking against your open strings." Now on the piano, it was a joy for me at 5 years old to learn how to play the piano, because I think I had basically really good coordination. And then it just became a really joyful activity for me. And so by the time I got to the violin when I was 7, I could read both treble and bass clef, and it made such a huge difference. So piano will always have a huge love lump in my heart.
Piano is the best instrument. I always said that. It's the orchestra, right? You want to sound like the orchestra, play the piano.
Well, my mother said if I wanted to be the sound of the orchestra, I had to pick one instrument. She said, "Which one could you?" She said, "You can't play all of them." I said, "Violin," and that was that.
Yeah. Okay. I want to come back to what I said that I came up with today. We are here, between the three of us, represent about 400 years of music. Robert, your expertise is 20th century, 21st century, I assume. David, a big focus of your career is Baroque music. I feel most comfortable with Romantic music. Give me Schumann, Brahms, I don't have to construct an interpretation. It feels like this is my language. So between the three of us, there are many years, like a big overview of the history of music and the history of modern, let's say, European culture. And this brings me back to high performance. As performers, we, at least in classical music, but it's very often the case with dance and with theater, we are a bridge between the person who wrote the piece and the audience. We kind of what we call interpret the piece, and we try to make sense of what the person thought when they wrote the piece, and have it in some way make sense to the audience. And especially when we talk about, well, I think it goes both ways. Baroque music was written in a very different age. People didn't have cars, they didn't have airplanes, their life was really different. And then on the other extreme, 20th century, like contemporary music speaks a language that is kind of new and really is a challenge to many people, including me. I had to play a lot of 20th century contemporary music. I still find a lot of it doesn't really speak my language. So there's always a play between trying to honor the composer, the person who wrote the piece, the thing that we're interpreting. It is not our words, and still have it make sense to our contemporary audience. I mean, when our audience listens to Baroque music, they have a different world experience than the audience of Baroque times, right? You still want it to make sense to them. You probably don't play it the way it was played 400 years ago. So could you say something to that? Like a performer is an interpreter, a translator, or somehow trying to transmit a message that is very often not really yours.
Well, I mean, just very broadly, I mean, performance traditions have changed. You know, if you were to compare, I don't know, Shakespeare in the 1950s versus the 1980s versus now, it changes radically, of course. I know each generation, each person within each generation has to remake something. And in a sense, that I think through the kind of mediatization of music and art, you know, YouTube and Vimeo and all of these things, that kind of window of in which things have changed has sped up enormously, and it's now changing so fast it's almost hard to sort of catch up. And I think this then speaks to ideas of fashion in sound, and actually setting oneself aside from those fashions and saying, well, I need to know about that, and what I'm doing is within a broader context and certain traditions to do with my instrument, or to do with the repertoire, or the way in which it's recorded, and you know, all of these other considerations. But then actually then one needs to sort of also keep that in one's inner ear, and at the same time set it aside and say, well, what can I do with it? What can I do with this thing? How can I make it real? How can I make something, you know, speak right now? And I think this is, for me, one of the most interesting times is when one comes to learn a new piece, and you know, start again with something. You know, there's this fantastic sort of tabula rasa at this particular moment, when especially a piece that's not really known very much, or a piece that's not recorded very much. You know, you have this opportunity to make something completely fresh, and that can be a bit terrifying as well. Actually, it can be a bit. You think, oh, you know, am I doing it the right way? But you know, you have to have a certain amount of confidence in your sound, in your ability, and in your listening to be able to say, well, I'm going to put forward my way of doing this, and to hell with it, you know. and you know, and this also plays into this image that we have as musicians, you know, that and as people, that we all want to be liked. And actually, I made a whole sort of CD of improvisations over summer at Coventry Cathedral, and I realised very soon after this that one of my motivations in doing this was that I didn't really care if people liked what I was doing or not, and I really liked that. Yeah, I liked it, and I think perhaps other people will as well, but it doesn't really matter if they don't. In fact, if they don't like it, that might be also part of the there might be some kind of confirmation that it was artistically doing something worthwhile. So
It's a valid reaction, not liking it.
absolutely, yeah. I mean, I don't mind that. That's okay.
So David, how do you become that bridge between a composer who is dead for 400 years and, I mean, you play Bach. Bach never heard a modern piano. He never heard the violins that we have today. Still, you can play his pieces on modern instruments, and you're playing it for the audience of today.
Right.
How do you make sense of this?
Well, I have nothing against Bach being played on modern instruments, but in 1982, in the San Francisco Bay Area, harpsichordist Lorette Goldberg formed Philharmonia Baroque Orchestra of the West. And I was in school at that time, finishing up one more year, and I was in her Baroque performance practice class. But I managed to attend this first concert, and when they put the bow to the string and blew into the Baroque oboe, and the voice sang, it was a Bach cantata, I just thought, oh, now Baroque music means ever so much more, it makes much more sense to me. That's the sound I want to make. I want to have a gut string, I want to have a Baroque bow, I want to study this. And it was really a life-changing evening. I just turned. I was at the time playing in the San Francisco Opera Orchestra. I had already had 3 symphony jobs starting at age 19. I played in Toledo, Ohio Symphony. I played in the San Diego Symphony and one in New York City. And I just thought, this is really how I want to sound, how I want to reach out with my own particular personal voice. And things just happened really, really quickly. I went over to Belgium and I worked with Sigiswald Kuiken for a week in Antwerp. And I studied with Monica Huggett at the Vancouver Early Music Program. And then I started being invited to go to Les Arts Florissants in Paris. So I had all these incredibly rich, gut-sounding, stringy-sounding musical experiences. And I still love to hear Bach played beautifully on the modern violin. There's some things that are so much more easy to do on the modern violin with the Bach. And in the hands of a highly performing musician, it really doesn't matter. You can play a Baroque instrument really badly and say, oh, well, I play Baroque music. You can play a modern instrument badly, and maybe somebody doesn't want to hear that either. But if on both ends of the spectrum, if you've got somebody that is committed to learning through their body, their instrument, and how they are going to conceive of the sound through the life and times of the composer, that's how I bridge the gap. My teachers always insisted that you put yourself back in that historical life and times where there was no electricity, where they used candles, where you had to write out all your manuscripts with a quill pen. And what's the difference? What does it mean to you? How can you transmit that idea to the audience?
Yeah.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, different early music groups, going back to the 1950s, someone like David Munro in London, thinking about how medieval music sounded. I mean, he thought, well, it doesn't sound like the London Philharmonic. So he went over and looked at listened to Bulgarian folk groups. And then, I mean, I remember, David, the excitement, I have similar kind of excitement there listening to those early recordings from the 1980s of Trevor Pinnock and the English Concert as well. And just this incredibly exciting, fresh sound. And, and actually, that sound has thinking of groups like Concerto Italiano or Musica Eterna, or these groups, that sound has evolved enormously. And really, early music groups, just like everybody else, are subject to the same kind of paradigms of fashion, but also of seeking new types of sounds, new tempi. And this also is something that's really come through in recording techniques. These actually being able to hear these instruments, which are actually quite quiet relative to modern instruments often, and be able to hear them up very, 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 very close, and hear what's, hear the kind of that as you say, that lovely sound of the Baroque bow going across the gut string. It's this sort of very 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 bitey kind of sound. Put it bitey, that's not a very good word, but
Yeah.
rich and strong and sharp sort of sound.
Yeah, I find it an interesting balance. There's always a play between being true to the historical context of the music, especially if it's a few centuries old, and still you want it to make sense to us, and your audience has heard Stravinsky and Puccini, so it is not a Baroque audience. You cannot change that.
Right.
So there's that.
But there's this experience, and I think we have talked about this before, but this, if I think about the kinds of lessons I've had from people over the years, some of the very best lessons I've ever had have been from instruments. And actually this instrument that one plays, a new instrument, and the instrument says, no, don't touch me like this. I want to be touched like this. It's like a person. I don't want to be touched like this. Like this. Oh, this is nice. And then suddenly, I had this experience many years ago playing the organ in the Adolf Busch Hall in Harvard University, this beautiful Flentrop organ, and I suddenly started playing it. I thought, I really can't play the organ at all. I have to really go back and rethink everything, and it was such a great experience. It was kind of revelation, and it was really just a call to stop and to start to listen, to go back and do things more simply, to listen to oneself in the process of making a sound. And it didn't matter how complex the sound was, because you're in this dialogue with this instrument and the acoustic and the space, and it was just a very revelatory experience for me. I mean, David, you must have had this experience many times playing instruments.
Well, I had ear infections when I was a kid, and this is just a little story, but when I went to the doctor, he said, "Oh, I hear you play the violin." I said, "Yes." He said, "That's wonderful. Who's your favorite composer?" And I said, "I like Bach." And he looked disappointed. He said, "Oh, what about Mozart?" And I had already formed a passion for Bach from listening to a few records. And Bach has sort of been my thing. One of the most fun things I did with a student whom I had for about 10 years, she was an adult. She had also studied with this Kato Habash. Her name is Jean Ann Weber. We went through every single movement of solo Bach over a period of 10 years and did it applying the Kato Habash new approach principles, which means Kato Habash had gone to school in Budapest in the 1920s, when Kodály was there. So Kodály's thing was, you hear with your eyes, you sing it first, you clap the pulse, you solfege it, and only then do you play it. And she applied those principles. She formed that into her, I don't want to say method, she hated that word, but her premise is that you train yourself from the inside out. But hearing with the eyes is really important. Look at the page, and you have to be able to hear what's on the page there, because then you'll be able to really create and really interpret what's going on there. You can take it to a whole different level by hearing with your eyes. But I was always able to hear with my eyes because they discovered I had perfect pitch, which got ruined when I started playing at 415 for Baroque music, 430 for classical music, French Baroque music. We played some of it at A392. And I played one time a set of Bach cantatas at A464. So my ears now, I call it adjustable pitch.
this can mess up your perfect pitch.
It's
So
gone.
give me a second. The audience, anybody who is here live with us, if you have any questions that you want us to address, please put them in the Q&A. We'll take a look at that in a moment. And let's bring our conversation to Feldenkrais. So we are interpreters, we're performers. So there's the material, then there's us as the in-between, then there is the audience who receives the message, and who knows what happens. This is kind of a magical exchange. How does Feldenkrais come in? How do we help this process? Are there any parallels with the way we work in Feldenkrais and the way we work with interpreters, like listening, being in the moment, seeing what comes next, improvising? David, how do you work with musicians?
Well, I'm really sorry that we can't touch each other more these days, but it's coming back around a little bit. I first discovered Feldenkrais because I had a little left shoulder issue. And a friend of mine said, oh, go see Elizabeth. And she did this and she did that. She had me lie down and her hands were giving me all this information. And I always gave a lot of information with my hands, as did Miss Habash when I went to her in London. So I like to work with people on a physical level, because if I touch, like to just get their bow arm going, if I touch up in their shoulder and bring their awareness to way down in their pelvis, through their spine, through the shoulder blade, up to the arm, it makes a huge difference. You know, they move in a different way. They make a completely different sound. And that's very, very gratifying. I like knowing this stuff.
Yeah. I find it extremely helpful when working with musicians. Any kind of musician, they have some awareness of their body, and very often it is very limited because they have a technique that teachers had their focus on some things they were doing and absolutely blind to other parts of their bodies and other parts of movement. So we have this advantage of a really global, holistic, whole body, whole person way of looking very specifically, and we know what to do with it. What do you say, Robert?
Well, that's what I think I like about it, is that conservatoire musicians are often extremely focused on the goal, on where I want to get to, because time is short and life is short, and there's a new concert and there's a new repertoire and there's a new competition, etc., etc. So there's in the interests of kind of reversing the telescope, as it were, what Feldenkrais does is it gets people curious about the process, which is why they got into it in the first place, really, not just to be a famous high performing artist, as it were, but to actually, engage with those lovely little discoveries that happen in the rehearsal room as you go through with that, for instance, that lovely kind of moment when you've been thinking about various aspects of awareness of a piece and making something softer and more easy, which can often be about trying to involve more of yourself in a particular action, for instance. But that lovely moment when you walk into your rehearsal studio the next day, and you may we've all had this feeling, you walk in the next day to practice and you think, oh, I don't really want to play. Oh, I'm feeling a bit tired today. And then suddenly, oh, I'm re-engaged with this process. And oh, isn't it wonderful? And sometimes, the sort of serendipity of it all, that marvelous moment which happens to you while you're in that process of something something happening again, and you think, oh, that was a result of what I did maybe yesterday or the day before, but and then at that moment you discover, you think, oh, and there's something else now as well. So that idea of being a critical, self-reflecting musician is very much part of the Feldenkrais mentality, as it is part of the high performance mentality. And the word critical, I think, is often really misunderstood as something negative. It really means evaluation. But more specifically, I think what it means is nuanced judgment through differentiation, or differentiation through nuanced judgment, if you want to put it that way. And that is exactly what the Feldenkrais method is doing. It's encouraging us to do at every moment in an ATM lesson as well. So you can really think about, and I often think about practicing or playing as like giving myself an FI or giving myself an ATM. And you walk in each day and think, well, what's it going to be today? I don't know. It's going to be this is going to be fun, and I think that's the joy in it for me, anyway.
Yeah, quite a few speakers during the whole summit were talking about this play between the performer's specific goal. They have to perform something specific. They have a goal in mind. They know where they want to get. And
Yes.
Feldenkrais method, in which we open possibilities and open up new options. And
sometimes actually
the goal is there.
Yeah, and sometimes this thing of being of welcoming the unwelcome is something that's very important. So welcoming something that is completely a mistake, or something that's wrong, or even a sound that's not a very nice, that someone might say, "Oh, that's not a very nice sound," but actually welcoming that strange thing as an opportunity to reassess one's own sound, or what one is doing, and this could be, mistakes can be the, a great learning tool like that.
Yeah, we have a comment from Alan Fraser. I'm going to read it to you. Can a Feldenkrais style sensitivity to one's physical interaction with the musical shape bring us to an interpretation that transcends our own historical moment? David.
I would say absolutely, yes. No, I mean, that's a brilliant observation. And I think that has happened to me because I'm working on my own edition of the Bach suites for viola, and I go there and it's like, oh, I have been playing these for years and years and years. Today, like Robert said earlier, a way of adding up things to get to 4. I figured out 3 different fingerings for this one tiny little measure that I hadn't thought of before. And I had just been doing the same thing over and over again. So in that moment, I had a completely different experience of where I'm coming from, passing through that measure, and where I was going with that phrase of music. So I say absolutely.
Yeah, I want to testify that for me, I had to sit many hours at the piano. I spent my 30 years of musical career as an accompanist and a university teacher. So my work was accompanying students working on their interpretation. I was teaching at the piano for hours. So I think, I'm sure the Feldenkrais method helped me survive it and be able to enjoy it. But also it really changed my perspective of what I was doing. And I believe it really changed radically my presence, the way I was in rehearsal and the way I was on stage, or in an exam, or just playing for an audience. And what it really did for me is open up a huge space that I didn't have when I finished studying. When I got my certificate as an accompanist, I had this specialized training in the Vienna Conservatory. And right after that, I started the Feldenkrais training, and my piano playing changed radically without taking a single piano lesson during these 4 years of training.
Mhm.
So really, and I think there is again a parallel between being a musician and being a Feldenkrais practitioner. As a musician, you do a lot of ear training, so you really learn to hear more. Your awareness becomes more complex, more wider. You notice many things at once. This is necessary when you're a musician. When you play with other people, you have to hear what is happening. You have to tune your instrument if you play a string instrument. Your attention has to be in many places. And when you have the Feldenkrais world of increased awareness, it becomes so much more. This is like one huge sphere of awareness on top of the other. This was really an amazing change.
Well, what you're also really talking about, I think, is something that is perhaps a little bit of an issue for the Feldenkrais community, and that is that when we, when one of the things that performing arts does when it engages with Feldenkrais is that, in a sense, it remakes or repurposes the Feldenkrais method in a way that doesn't necessarily bring any kind of bring it into conflict, although it might. In a productive kind of way, but actually where performing arts kind of critiques the Feldenkrais method. It sort of asks, what's the limit of the method, and or it also asks questions like, well, what is this method for me, and how is it working its way out through me? How and when am I going to use it? When do I have to say, when am I going to stop using it consciously, and is it just doing something within me anyway? So these are kind of inter and intrapersonal questions that one has to ask of oneself and the method as well. And this constant dialogue one has with the method is not just one in which one is just accepting it for what it was for Feldenkrais, but for something that has to be remade by everyone that uses it, I think.
Yeah, Robert, one of your books is on the book list of the summit. You have more than one. This is the Feldenkrais method in creative practice. Is this the one?
Yeah, that's
I understand that you're the editor of the book and a co-author. It has various authors. So tell us in a few words about this book.
Well, I mean, I was interested really in different voices across acting, theatre, and music, and Alan was one of the people involved in this as well. But Alan Fraser. But the book really covers aspects of cultural background, of science, and practice. But it was literally an attempt to try and think beyond what the method is giving. So authors really engaged with it through their practices, research, and through their own particular kinds of lens to take the method perhaps into unusual and unorthodox directions. So, I mean, my own particular interest was in Lacanian psychoanalysis, which was something that was, and relating that and thinking about Glenn Gould through a certain kind of lens. This idea of love thy neighbor, which Feldenkrais talked about, but Feldenkrais had talked about it as a kind of refinement of Freud, and then thinking about how that could be used to think about what Gould was doing. So, this was, just bringing other kinds of disciplines into it, and also, acknowledging the kinds of disciplines that Feldenkrais himself was. Feldenkrais was a very interdisciplinary character in his thinking, and the book really just tries to deal with that and take the method into a new kind of sphere.
Yeah. So the book is in the book list. You can find it in the summit portal.
There's a nice discount available as well, so there we are.
Yeah. Okay. So, David, any final thoughts about Feldenkrais high performance?
I think that some of the highest people operating at the highest performing levels, sometimes it's more difficult for them to, when they have trouble, let's say they have pain or whatever, for them to reach out, because you're supposed to get to a level and then just stay there. And that's not always true. Nothing about life really is fixed. It's always mutating. I just want to get back to being able to have people on the table. And I did teach an ATM class live about 3 weeks ago. One little funny story is that I was working with a good friend in FI, and she was nervous, and she talks and she chatters. I thought, oh my God, how can I get her to shut up? So I taught her, I went into pelvic clock. I started teaching her an ATM while she was on the table. And I started talking so that she would be quieter, and it absolutely worked. And I just want to say, you know, I always tell my teacher, Kato Havash, I haven't written a book, but Stage Fright, Causes and Cures, it might look backwards to you. I highly recommend this for reading for anybody that is interested in the concept of stage fright and getting rid of it. And the combination of Feldenkrais and this particular method for me is something that really works, and I'm trying to pass it along as much as possible to younger teachers.
Yeah, we didn't talk about stage fright and how we can help that with Feldenkrais. That's a whole other subject for another conversation. And we have another comment from Alan, so I'm going to read that to you. Would you say that when we practice the method from the point of view of functionality, that is musical functionality, then there are no limits to the application of Feldenkrais method to musical performance?
Well, I'm not just agreeing with Alan because I'm agreeing with him. I do agree with that. I think it just expands you in such a way that your possibilities become even more unlimited.
Yeah, if without sounding pretentious, when you say there is no limit to my method, you may sound arrogant, but there is some intrinsic quality in the Feldenkrais method that it is limitless because it is not prescriptive. You're not going anywhere. You're just opening space, and when you open space, there is no limit.
Right.
So I like this way of thinking.
It's a very utopian idea, yeah.
Yeah, I'm 60. I'll be 67 years old in December, and my work with Feldenkrais and with Kato Havash, I feel like I'm about 45. I mean, I just feel incredibly flexible. And I feel like I can start each practice session fresh. It's a wonderful gift to be part of this community.
Yeah, there's that lovely story about I think it's Pablo Casals, who would get up out of bed at age 85 or whatever it was and crawl over to the piano, and then when he'd start playing the piano, he'd go back to being a 20-year-old or something like that. Because that engagement with the instrument actually, we are as various philosophers have written about, we are engaged with our instruments as prosthetic things that then we technologize, and that in turn also technologize us. So we're doing something to our instrument, but our instrument is doing something to us, and that Casals example is a good example of the instrument, of him remembering something deep within himself when he plays that instrument. I mean, but there is this process, I think, also of both of remembering within oneself and also forgetting as well, because and that process is a kind of limitless process as long as you go on playing. That's there's this listening to what's going on within oneself from the past and into these possibilities of what one might be in the near future. That's a really, I find that a really fascinating thing to grapple with when you're playing, when you're practicing or performing.
We have another comment or question from Katie Bull, another one of our speakers today. Curious how you bridge curricular demands for predetermined results, rubrics and syllabi results, with the Feldenkrais process orientation. Always a problem, isn't it? Do you have a set of ATMs that you integrate for structural purposes, skills acquisition, or do you teach to the room in each class, letting the performer's skills unfold on the organic timelines, or both?
I know. I don't go into a class with any prescriptions about these things at all. I think, I just have to be free to react to what someone does. I'm aware that there's a syllabus and that we need to get to some kind of point at the end, but if I was going in there thinking, oh no, we must do this, we must do that, there are little markers that I will try and go through to try and get us through towards something. But I think it's less about where I'm going than how I'm getting there, and thinking about actually what the individual needs are of people who are right in front of me at that particular moment.
I have to agree. I mean, I've never gone into a private lesson with a lesson plan. The kid is different, the student is different from week to week, and I just pick up. I remember where we were before, and I kind of pick up where we left off, but I don't have any preconceived notions. I have a lot of material I can draw on.
Yeah.
Katie asked if you have a set of ATMs.
No.
That you integrate for structural purposes. I don't know. The one thing that I can think of a set of ATMs is when I have a kind of a subject, a title to a workshop or to a series of classes. I did a breathing workshop for singers. So I had an idea. It was about breathing. Breathing was a kind of in the forefront. But a fixed set of ATMs for a specific musical results, I wouldn't go that far.
If only it was so easy, but it's not. It's not.
I really enjoy the
book, this was the whole point of Feldenkrais's teaching originally. Him saying, "Well, I'm not teaching you. I'm giving you the conditions under which you can in which you can learn." And teaching is to say, be like me, do like me. If you do this, you'll get this, and that's not what this is about at all. No, that kind of ethos is not what this is about.
Yeah, I really enjoy the fact that there is no end result to a lesson. So people stand up after a lesson and they say this happened or that happened and things came up, and some unpleasant things, but usually pleasant things. But I do not predict this. I don't know what's going to happen to each student.
Of course, but what you're hearing there is the curiosity in the process. So actually, if you can get people curious about the process, then that's a sign of good teaching, I think.
Yeah, for me, it was always about what makes this person tick. How can I open them up a little bit more? Where's the key? What's the key to that particular lock? Metaphorically speaking, of course.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Robert, David, it's been a pleasure. We could go on forever, of course. There's so much to talk about, but we've passed the hour. Thank you so much for being here with me, for sharing your ideas, your wisdom. Thank everybody who is here with us live and anybody who will listen to the recording. It's going to be up for the next 48 hours. And if you upgrade to the lifelong access to the whole material of the summit, this will also be there. Thank you so much. And we'll see you tomorrow. The summit goes on.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Michael and David. It's been great. Lovely. Thank you. Lovely to share all this with everyone.